Hello, my friends. On today's episode, I'm talking with Pete, and we're talking about surprise expenses and how to overcome them. It turns out that early in your career as a gym owner, there's going to be a lot of surprises that pop up out of nowhere. And really, over time, you'll learn that it's impossible to avoid all the surprises. So, we talk about our best tips for staying ahead of the curve and making sure you can weather any storm of expenses that comes your way. So, keep on listening. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business Unicorns podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Pete Dupuis. Pete, how are you, sir?
Hey there. Happy spring. I'm doing well.
Happy spring. Yeah, we're just before we started recording, we were talking about the weather just really took a turn in the Northeast last week, and it feels like borderline summer. It was like I was sitting out front in the sun. It was like 75 out in my front yard today. It's kind
Yeah,
of
when you
magic.
start having kids, when they get into elementary school, they think that every day from about February 1st on is a day to negotiate wearing shorts to school. And every single morning of my life, every weekday morning of my life is an argument about whether or not they need to wear pants to the bus stop. And it still hasn't stopped. So we're in spring in midday, but I'll tell you what, I know for a fact it was 42 degrees at 8:15 a.m. this morning,
Uh-huh.
and Colin was ready to go to war on the fact that he should have been allowed to stand at the bus in shorts.
It was a
It's
full
a
battle
deadline.
for the right to wear shorts.
Yeah, I
That's
promise you, if there's, I will say with absolute certainty that I just said something relatable to some of our audience.
I'm sure. I'm sure. What's so funny? I'm a big shorts wearer, like almost year round. My brother is too. We come from a family that just runs hot, and so if I can keep my legs free and stay cool, like I'm gonna do it. And I'm pretty comfortable wearing shorts like in the snow. So I'm with Colin. I get it. I get
Yeah,
it. But I also know,
Colin loves your
parents
style.
got to teach lessons. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, before we dive into today's topic, I just want to do a quick shout out to for all our listeners to follow you and Business Unicorns on Instagram. You do such great work in putting out regular content on your own Instagram channel and on Twitter. And more, we're doing stuff on the Business Unicorns Instagram. So, listeners, if you're not following us yet, we put episodes of the podcast up there. We put clips from Mark's YouTube up there. We put Pete's Instagram content, some of his tweets on our Instagram. So go follow us. There's such great stuff in there, and people talk to you too. So you can DM us on there, and we'll have a real conversation. We're real people.
Yeah, somehow overnight, BFU became a prolific Instagram content creator, and now I feel a little bit insecure about my output because the collection of people in BFU as a whole are clearly collectively putting a lot more effort into it because I'm overwhelmed by the volume.
Yeah, we're honestly we're just trying to do something for make up for all the years we barely paid any attention to it, and so you're really our inspiration. You've been playing the game for a lot longer, so I think between all of your personal accounts and our Business of Unicorns on Instagram and you on Twitter, there's a lot of great content we're putting out that I think we're all really proud of. So listeners, if you haven't followed us yet, please go do that. But pivoting to today's topic, what we really want to talk about today is this idea. We're really going to talk about finances in your business, and specifically wanted to just have a little chat about the idea that you can't always plan for everything financially speaking. So we'll just share some examples of times, both Pete and I have been surprised by, sometimes big ticket expenses that pop in, and how we've learned to kind of get in front of that and plan accordingly as the years go by. So Pete, you want to just talk a little bit about like why this topic popped up for you and what some of your experience has been?
Yeah, well, this one's just timely because we're in tax season,
Yep.
and as some of us are getting caught off guard by tax bills, or some of us are pleasantly surprised by returns, it has helped me to reflect on some of the expenses that might feel normal to me at this point, but were foreign when they first hit my inbox. And
Yeah.
I didn't always have a nice budget in place to plan for and anticipate some of these things. And I guess my overarching thought was that if you're early in your operation, year one, maybe year two, you don't necessarily know what's going to hit you when. And you were quick to correct me pre-call in saying that this still happens, and you guys are a decade
Yeah.
in. And
I wish
so
it ended in year two, but
it
there's
doesn't.
still moments of surprise 12 years in.
Yeah, it stings less, the bigger your
Totally.
operation gets. But there are certain ones like I don't know, maybe when I started my business I thought that, doing a K1 for a company with an LLC was just going to be as simple as going on TurboTax, and it wasn't, and it was more
Hmm.
expensive, and it is definitely the easiest check I write every year, our tax prep, but it's not an insignificant one,
Yeah.
and it wasn't something that I was told to budget for early. So for me, this is about having a comfortable little slush fund, and you can start slowly to accumulate it, but there's got to be a rainy day fund for expenses that you don't anticipate. And I could probably list off 10 of them that caught me by
Yeah.
surprise
Well,
and continue
let's
to
do that.
irritate me annually.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, let's all just kind of let's just list some things that if you're a few years into your business, you may not have encountered yet, or if you've been doing this for a long time, you just might not have come across this yet, or didn't realize you should be investing in that thing at all. Maybe just let's list a few that really are on top of our mind, and then we can talk even more about solutions. So, what are some of the expenses that really bit you in the butt, starting in the early years that you just weren't expecting? Tax prep is a great example.
Tax prep was one. One that gets me, doesn't surprise me every year, but it irritates me every year is our insurance audit. So,
Hmm.
for example, like an audit of our workers comp, usually the figure associated with our spend on this annually is attached directly to our revenue. And
Yep.
if we have a great year, they are quick to audit us. Well, they audit us every year, but the great years, they are quick to tell me, you know what, we undershot this. And they're making me pay retroactively for insurance coverage that already happened. And that one always frustrates me a little bit. So
Yep.
if you pulled out a policy saying we're going to do $250,000 in revenue this year, and then the audit comes back and you're like, look at how smart we are, look at how good we are, we did 400K, they're going to say, that's awesome, good work, you owe us $1,500. And it
Hmm.
it it always irritates me, and it qualifies as one of those good problems to have. And as I said to you before the call, what makes me the most mad is that I've never got a message after the audit saying, you know what, we overcharged you, here's some money
Yeah.
back. But
Yeah.
in the years we do well, they're definitely quick to tell us that I could put some more in their pocket. What's an example you've run into?
Yeah, 100%. I just want to plus one those, like, professional fees like tax keeping and things like that, or professional fees like web hosting and things like that, just like are just not under my radar in those early days as things to care about. All kinds of insurances, and at MFF, one of the insurances we needed in those early days that just was not on my radar is because we have big front windows in one of our spaces. New York City
Mm-hmm.
requires you to have like a separate plate glass insurance that's just like never freaking heard of before in my life. So things like that were just not even on my radar. I would say, since then, after the first few years, things that we got better at quickly, but there was a bunch of really surprising big ticket items, was things about our space, was things about things that are computers breaking, iPads breaking, sound equipment that needs to be replaced. At one point, we were dropping such heavy weights in one of our spaces, we destroyed the actual structure of our floor in our space. And that was a big ticket item. That was really working with our landlords to pay for tens of thousands of dollars worth of structural repairs to our space. So for me, those were a lot of the ones that bit me in the butt of all the ways running and managing a physical location can go wrong. Leaks, electrical, in New York, we're all on top of each other. So we've had leaks from the apartments above our MFF space into our space, stuff from down below, you name it. So I think, physical space is one that was always surprising. It isn't now. It was until the last 4 or 5 years they really have a sufficient, to your point, slush fund to help address those. But we'll talk more about solutions in a second. But yeah, what else has been on your list over the years?
I get a personal property tax from the town here in Hudson,
Mm,
Massachusetts every year, where they
yep.
want me to self-report the technology we have on site and the property that we have in the space, and then pay tax against that. That caught me by surprise early on. I stupidly, I'm embarrassed to say that I made this mistake, but there was more than one occasion over the years where I forgot to renew my LLC, my annual report to the state of Massachusetts, which is
Mm,
$500 a year. And when it came time for tax prep, my accountant would say, "Hey, I'm not seeing your renewal fee on there. What's the deal?" And suddenly I'm paying two of those at once, and the state will let you get 2, 3, 4 years in arrears on that, and then come at you in one moment. Is my understanding. They might come at you and say, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
by the way, if you want to stay a company that is not dissolved in the eyes of the Bay State, you're going to pay those all at once." I've never mistakenly gone more than 2 years of not paying them, but I have had a couple of occasions where I dropped $1,000 at once.
Yep.
Stuff,
Those are
just
good
little stuff
ones.
like that. There are a
Yeah.
lot of things. This kind of reminds me of when I went to college and I got there, and I realized in the first couple of weeks that nobody gives a shit if you do your homework or you show up to class, because the tuition check already cleared, and they're
Yep.
like, your parents' money's in our inbox. You don't want to come, don't come. We don't care. But your
Yep.
GPA is going to reflect it down the road. Small business ownership in general is a lot like that. There isn't a checklist.
Yeah.
There are things that just hit you, and they unapologetically deposit these invoices into your lap in year 2 or year 3, and you just didn't see them
Mm-hmm.
coming. And there's so many things that you don't know,
Yeah.
and that's why you need to give yourself a little bit of a cushion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm
Yeah.
not talking about debilitating, backbreaking $10,000 invoices, but I am talking about a couple $100 here and there that pile up and they sting
Yeah.
when they catch you off guard, or
I,
if they
I
catch you
have.
at a slow part of the year.
Yeah, I have two. I've been thinking of as we've been talking about this that really just I'm still bitter about, it's understandable, but two that I think will come after you with these third parties who try and get money from you. So I'm thinking of music licensing. Most
Mm-hmm.
gyms have heard from organizations like ASCAP and others that do if you play music in your space, that they want licensing money for you using that artist's work, which is understandable, but no one tells you about that. And sometimes they want a lot of money. And so there's groups like that you have to deal with. Early on at MFF, we were a little loosey goosey about using images we found on the internet in our blog
Mm-hmm.
posts and our emails. So we had image licensing people come after us for money and we'd take things off our website, but still had to pay for the fact that image had been on our website without being licensed. And those were hundreds and hundreds, sometimes it's thousands of dollars for both of those situations. And there's third parties looking out to make a buck, and in some cases, rightfully so, but it also friggin' stings. Yeah, so I think we've painted a clear picture of like early on, there's going to be a lot of surprises. Over time, hopefully you can predict a lot of those. They become just part of your routine and you start to budget for them. But I don't think you're ever 100% done. There's always going to be something around the corner that can surprise you, which is why we've both been mentioning the idea of having some sort of slush fund, some sort of emergency fund, some sort of buffer that helps you budget better year after year after year to predict more of the predictable things. So just maybe talk a little bit, Pete, about how you think about that at Cressy.
Ooh, well, we do keep a cushion. I
Mm-hmm.
I try and keep $5,000 liquid at all times
Yep.
for us to absorb blows. Coincidentally, when COVID first set in, it was at an opportune time for myself and Eric Cressy as it relates to the part of the year that we generate cash flow, and actually the time of the month that we take ownership distributions. And we had an inkling that something weird was coming down the pipe in February that year, and we both said, you know what, let's not write ourselves checks for February just yet. Let's just see what's going on.
Yep.
We had a nice winter. We've each got cash flow. Let's leave a little bit of cash in the well and see what happens. And then when March 1st came around, or I should say when April 1st came around, we were definitely not writing March checks. And so we fortunately dodged a bullet that allowed us to keep the payroll faucet running and make rent and not furlough our team. But if the timing was just a little bit off on that, like give or take 10 days, if it came 10 days later, next thing you know, Eric and I would be writing personal checks back into the business to make the same decisions that we were making. And in hindsight, that was part of the impetus for us scaling up that what I used to do, like $1,500 to $2,000 of cash flow that I'd always keep there just for little agitating
Yep.
expenses like that, got bumped up to 5K in that
Yeah.
period of my life. But Eric and I do have an agreement, and now John, that we collectively are ready to go into our pockets in extenuating circumstances if we need to, because we want to empty the account with a pace, kind of a cadence that we like, and we're
Yep.
all on a system there. I do have one thought that I don't want to
I think,
escape me before we wrap.
yeah, go
Um,
for it. Yeah, share it. And I want to go back to what you just said, but yeah, share that so we don't lose it.
Okay. That thought was just that there are potential expenses buried in our leases that
Mm,
are very much boilerplate and are not out of line for the landlord, but are difficult to appreciate until they hit you. And the big one that strikes me is HVAC maintenance.
yeah,
And the language is typically going to say that it's on the tenant to deal with HVAC related maintenance and repairs and things of that nature. And those are not insignificant when they do
yeah,
happen.
yep,
And it's a for some gym owners, it's a matter of deciding whether we're going to run the AC at all this summer, sort of a deal. And so just
yeah,
because a attorney reads your lease and says, yeah, this is all boilerplate and they're not trying to screw you here, you still need to try and ask the questions, do a little bit of digging to understand the implications of having upkeep for systems of that
yeah.
nature, because that can absolutely kick you in the teeth.
100%. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think it's a big part of like the space stuff that can be a surprise. My recommendation for folks is if you obviously should have a lawyer look at your lease, and I would ask that lawyer to make you an actual list of the things you are responsible for. Because it's coded in there. It's often buried in the legalese and it's hard to suss out, but they can, because you're paying them to, they're your lawyer, say, I want you to make me just a pure English language list or whatever language you prefer, but that I can read and understand to say, what are the expenses related to this building I am responsible for? In some cases, it's surprising. Like you might be responsible for snow removal. You might be responsible for taking care of the parking lot. You might be responsible for some common spaces you didn't think you were, right? HVAC, electrical, plumbing, some of these, they'll sneak in, right? They might be responsible for it within your walls, but not in the commons. Yeah, you get the idea. So I think that's a great one. That's a great one, Pete. Going back to what you said, I think is really a great first way for people to think about creating a slush fund for themselves is whether they're a sole owner, they have partners like we do. I think the idea is take as much money out of the business as you can afford to. The money should come out of the business. We all use the profit first system, but we like the idea of taking the profit out of the business and then having an agreement with your partners if you have them that you have an account somewhere that's liquid enough that you can reinvest in the business if you need to and have some agreement either with yourself or with your partners about how much that is. Is it $5,000 you're each willing to put in when need to in an emergency? Is it 1 month's expenses, 3 months expenses? What is the money you need? And I think that's a really great way of doing it, because what a lot of gym owners do is they leave the money just sitting in an account in the business and they don't take it out as an owner. And I think that's one way to think about it, is take it out first, and then maybe you commit to keeping some bit of your assets liquid so that you can reinvest in the business should you need to, and having that be either a verbal agreement amongst partners or maybe even a written agreement amongst partners, I think is really smart. Rather than just leaving money sitting in the business not working for you, because you can do other things with it, invest it, etc., if it's in your own pocket. Other than that, I will say that MFF and Business for Unicorns, we try to have at least 1 month's operating expenses as a rainy day fund. For MFF, we try and make it a little bit more. And once in a while, we'll need to borrow from that money, but then we'll pay it back. So we used to also use that rainy day fund as a little bit of a cash flow helper. So actually, we
Mm-hmm.
just did this recently for Business for Unicorns. We had to borrow for it for the end of the year for, I think, one of our retreats. And then we actually just been paying it back this last week to make sure it's back up at least 1 month of operating expense. And so I think, if you want to keep some money in the business, great. You can use it like your own little piggy bank. But I think that's how we weather the storm for some of these surprise expenses, which again, should be much greater when you're newer and much less when you've been around for a while. But I don't think they ever quite go away. And, COVID's been the ultimate example of that.
Yep.
Yeah. What else would
Totally
you add
agree.
to this topic?
Oh, uh, it's never going to stop. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And the
It
thing is,
stresses
it's
me out
not it's
thinking
not
about it.
because yeah, it's not because we're dumb, right? It's like I just want to stress here. It's not because we're not doing anything wrong. I mean, hello, we for a living now, Pete and I like talk to other gym owners all the time where we're constantly hearing about things they're going through. So not only do we have our own experience to draw from, but literally at this point, hundreds and hundreds of other gym owners, we know what they've been through. And even with all that information, we still get surprised from time to time. There's just so many ways for people to spend our money.
Yeah,
and
it's
and
probably a
it's
good reminder of the importance of us raising our prices consistently as well. For
yeah.
example, I got a text before this recording from Eric asking what our per head cost is on health insurance right now in Massachusetts.
Mm,
And one, the number is astonishing. And
yes.
two, when I put it up against where we started, we just passed a threshold of 4x the per head spend of what the exact same coverage was on the day we started our business.
Yep.
So my cost per person of insurance is a multiple of 4 times what it was in 2007. And I understand 2007 was 16 years ago, but there aren't a lot of things that have multiplied in cost 4 times since that.
Yeah.
And the only way to absorb those type of expenses is periodic price increases and driving more revenue. So it stings. It's infuriating every time, and I have yet to find a workaround.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great note to leave it on, is right. Is be prepared with some extra cash. And this is part of why we're always talking about rate increases in this podcast. I feel like we're talking about it on a regular basis because it can be a scary thing, but if you don't do it, it creates such a ripple effect of challenges in the business. You can't hire and afford great staff. You can't weather storms like the ones we've been talking about in this podcast, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a great message to leave folks with, Pete. Yeah.
It's everywhere. I reconciled our March numbers yesterday, and my monthly Zoom expense went up by like $1.50. That is nothing over the course of the year in the grand scheme of things. But then when I think of how many of us on this planet have Zoom accounts and I multiply that by $1.50, somebody did really well.
Someone made a great change. 100%. There's a bunch of executives getting some fat bonuses this year because everyone's paying $1.50 more.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is a great conversation. I think, it was part venting and cathartic for us to share all the ways we've been frustrated by surprise expenses. And hopefully for all of you, maybe in our list, you caught some that you've not been paying attention to, dear listeners. And you can get ahead of it by having a little piggy bank of money, either in your own personal account, the business account, and you're going to keep raising those rates to stay ahead of the curve. But thanks for a great chat, Pete. And dear listeners, if this was a fun podcast for you, please leave us a 5-star review everywhere you listen, and email us, Michael and Pete at businessunicorns.com. Let us know what you want us to talk about next. What topics should we cover that'd be really valuable for you? And if you have some guests you think we should talk to, let us know that too. We're always looking for suggestions. We read and respond to all of your emails. We're real people. And go follow us on Instagram as well. Pete's doing great work on Instagram and Twitter, and go follow the Business of Unicorns Instagram. Thanks for a great chat, Pete. I'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you, Michael. Talk soon.
Bye.